I've got sunshine.
In a rare interview shortly before his death, David Ruffin leaned back, looked into the camera, and spoke with that deep, raspy voice that had once touched millions of hearts.
That's why I say people taking people's places are.
He didn't talk about fame, didn't list his hits, didn't mention My Girl or the stage lights, just emotion. Just the raw honesty of a soul that had known both the highest highs and the lowest lows. The man who once brought an entire room to its feet with a single note, now sat quietly in the dark and said what the world had long ignored. David Ruffin did not leave this world in silence. Before he died, he left behind clues, scattered words, strange signs, and a dark truth that someone tried to bury. So, what really happened to David Ruffin? Who was hiding what, and why did the truth only emerge after he was gone? Don't look away. Hit subscribe now to uncover the full story of a legendary voice and the truth they didn't want you to know. From Mississippi dust to the Motown stage, a child born to sing wine. Mississippi didn't have much, but I knew I was born to sing. Maybe David Ruffin never spoke those words in front of a camera, but his life was a silent testament to them. In a place so remote that the map of America seemed to skim past it as if no one needed to remember it, a black child was born in 1941 carrying with him the Southern grit and a destiny not easily rewritten. Davis Eli Ruffin, later known as David Ruffin, didn't wait for the world to give him a chance. He forged one with a voice sculpted from pain, tempered by iron discipline, and fueled by dreams no one else in town dared to have. His father Eli, a stern preacher and mechanic, built within him a towering fortress of faith. But that fortress could not shield David from early loss, the death of his mother Ophelia, just months after his birth. Raised by a stepmother, he endured beatings and relentless religious pressure. For David, music wasn't a joy, it was the only way to breathe in a world that constantly tried to suffocate him. So the question became, could a child raised between the extremes of faith and punishment preserve the innocence of song, or would he have to learn to roar just to survive? The Ruffin family functioned as an unofficial gospel band, singing more in church than at home. Every child was a required piece of the puzzle. No one was allowed to fall out of tune. For David, his first stage had no spotlights, only a pulpit, scattered applause, and the gaze of his father. Every wrong note meant punishment, but from that, David learned something no school could teach: how to use his voice to mask the pain. At 14, while his peers were still learning to ride bikes, David ran away from home. It was both an escape and a pursuit of light. From Memphis to Arkansas, from churches to bars, from sermons to jazz, the nameless, faceless black boy carried only one weapon, a voice as rough as burning coal. In Hot Springs, fate smiled for the first time when he met Phineas Newborn Sr., an unofficial mentor who helped guide him from county fairs to real stages. So then, was music truly salvation, or merely a way to stay alive without being consumed by hardship? From singing in groups like the Dixie Nightingales and the Soul Stirrers, to competing in local talent shows, David wasn't performing for fame. He sang as if each note was a lifeline, a rebirth. He watched idols like Sam Cooke leave the church behind for the stage lights, and he knew he would walk that path too, even if it meant betraying the faith his father had instilled in him. Detroit, the promised land of Motown, was the destination. By the late 1950s, the industrial city was pulsing with the rise of soul music, and David followed his older brother Jimmy, who had already carved out a place in the music scene, in search of his own shot. But opportunity never knocks for those who make no sound. David knew that. He signed with labels like Anna Records and Checkmate Records, but remained just another promising voice among a forest of untapped talent. Was Motown not ready for him, or was he not yet bold enough to break through? And then came a fateful party. In a smoky room under dim lights, David grabbed the mic and sang a ballad that silenced the crowd. No one knew who the skinny guy in dark glasses was, but when his voice rang out, people forgot the conversations they'd been having. He wasn't just a good singer, he was someone who made music stop to listen to itself. That moment changed everything. When the Temptations were searching for a new spark to reignite their career, David didn't ask to join. He declared, "I'm the missing piece you've been looking for." Otis Williams later recorded that line in his autobiography as proof of David's astonishing confidence, or perhaps it was destiny speaking through him. In January 1964, David officially became a member of the Temptations, and he didn't need long to prove his bold words weren't arrogance. Whenever he stepped on stage, people didn't see the Temptations, they saw him. David's presence was like a whirlwind, pulling in both the audience and his bandmates, so much so that Berry Gordy, the Motown mogul himself, exclaimed, "This is the voice of an era." But when a tiger becomes aware of its own claws, who can tame it? What happens when the boy who once sang to survive begins living for the spotlight? Would David Ruffin continue soaring with the Temptations? Or would the very glow of fame burn the wings he had spent his whole childhood building? My Girl, My Rise, and the shadow that no one could extinguish. They once called the Temptations the group with no hits, a nickname half mocking, half pitiful within the Motown circles. The group had it all: striking looks, synchronized choreography, polished suits, and a tireless drive. But they were missing one thing: a voice that made the audience forget to breathe. Until David Ruffin walked in. No audition, no formal introduction. David just opened his mouth and everything they'd been missing suddenly seemed unnecessary. His gritty tenor wasn't the silky type of Marvin Gaye nor the smooth elegance of Smokey Robinson. David's voice was like a vintage car rolling down an empty street, rough, husky, but unforgettable because no one else dared to sound like that. It was both a scar and a declaration. And when Smokey Robinson wrote My Girl, he didn't write it for a group, he wrote it for David Ruffin. When the song debuted in late 1964, David didn't shout into the mic or belt to prove his worth. He simply sang gently, "I've got sunshine," on a cloudy day, and America froze. Not because the melody was beautiful, but because David sang as if he'd just discovered light in the middle of his own personal darkness. My Girl wasn't just their first hit, it was a declaration of a new era. It redefined the Motown sound in melody, harmony, and soul. Within 3 months it hit #1 on the Billboard chart. But more terrifying was this everything after it had to measure up. And David knew that. Not with arrogance, but with the instinct of a survivor. He gripped that opportunity as if letting go meant returning to Mississippi dust. The following string of hits was a tug-of-war between his inner world and the spotlight. Ain't Too Proud to Beg was a man pleading, knowing he's losing everything. I Wish It Would Rain Red Like a Depressed Star's Diary, I'm Losing You, was a scream in a crowded room where no one truly saw him. Not everyone heard it, but for those who've ever felt alone in a crowd, David's voice felt like a backlit embrace. He didn't perform, he became. When David sang, he peeled himself bare, and when he stepped onto the stage, he walked like a man with nothing left to lose. A knee-length coat, dark sunglasses shielding eyes that had seen more than life should allow. A panther's stride, slow, dangerous. Once he pushed the mic stand away and held a high note until breathless, then let out a soft laugh as if to say, I did that just to remind you I can. But fame, like any flame, burns closest to those who stand nearest. While the audience saw David as the soul of the group, the other members slowly began to feel like background props. David Ruffin and the Temptations, a phrase never officially endorsed, started appearing in media headlines. Worse, David allegedly asked Motown to print it on posters himself. He wasn't just a member anymore. He was becoming the center, and the center doesn't orbit anyone. Motown, known for its strict discipline, flatly refused the name change, but the damage was done. While fans worshipped David's voice and presence backstage, a quiet crisis was brewing. David spiraled into drug use. He skipped rehearsals, arrived late, demanded his own dressing room, his own car, his own security. He asked to be treated like Elvis Presley, a white king in a black body. And when people refused, David began to live as if he were the sky itself, needing no one's approval. The breaking point came in 1968 when Motown and the group decided to fire him. It was a painful but necessary decision. But like every tragic hero, David didn't leave quietly. That night he showed up unannounced at a Temptations concert, walked onto the stage mid-performance, grabbed the microphone and sang. The entire theater erupted. It was chaos, rebellion, love, and grief all at once. David Ruffin was telling the world, "You can kick me out of the group, but you can't erase me from history." After leaving the group, David released My Whole World Ended, a stunning ballad as painful as its title. It reached #9 on Billboard. A success, yes, but it wasn't My Girl. He continued his solo career, released albums, toured, but the shadow called David Ruffin of The Temptations was too massive. So massive even he couldn't walk out of it. He didn't collapse right away. But in the years that followed, David seemed like a survivor of his own legend. Still singing, still sparking attention, but no longer leading the way. From the one who brought light, he became the one who lived in its ashes. And the question remains, can a man rise so high that his own shadow burns him? Maybe. But with David Ruffin, that name never faded from the hearts of soul lovers. Because that voice, even if heard only once, was enough to ensure no one could ever take his place. The Fall, when a star believes he is the sky. After leaving The Temptations in 1968, David Ruffin entered an entirely different chapter of his life, one with no bandmates behind him to light the way through the mistakes ahead. If his years with the group brought him to the pinnacle of the Motown era, then the time that followed was a long descent marked by broken relationships, a derailed career, and a battle with himself. A star who once believed he was the entire sky. Ruffin's first solo album, My Whole World Ended the Moment You Left Me, released in 1969, was a moderate success. It peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 and proved his voice still held undeniable power. But it was a final flicker before the dark clouds of doubt and self-destruction closed in. His follow-up albums, Feelin' Good, David, Me and Rock and Roll Are Here to Stay, failed to make a lasting impact. The problem wasn't the music, it was Ruffin himself. By the late 60s, David had started using drugs regularly, but by the early 70s, things were spiraling out of control. Heroin, cocaine, alcohol, they became his constant companions. He was once arrested for carrying heroin, once crashed into a truck while high, and was hospitalized multiple times for overdoses. The man who once brought crowds to tears with a single high note had become a trembling shadow on small suburban stages, caught between fading hits and an unrelenting addiction. In his delusion, David still believed he was the center of the universe. He demanded to be treated like a major star, even though his name no longer dominated the charts. Once he insisted hotel staff roll out a red carpet from the entrance all the way to his bed. On another occasion, he refused to perform unless he could sing the entire set list regardless of schedules or other artists. For Ruffin, fame wasn't something he once had. It was something that in his mind still belonged to him forever, even if the world had moved on. A brief reunion with The Temptations in 1982 for the reunion album and tour with Eddie Kendricks thrilled fans. But behind the scenes, it was a brutal clash of egos. Ruffin showed up late, changed the setlist without notice, broke rules, and once again fell back into his old vices: drugs, alcohol, and self-destruction. What was supposed to be a comeback for a legend became yet another tragedy. Less than a year later, he was removed from the group, this time for good. In 1985, a small glimmer of hope appeared. The single I Couldn't Believe It, recorded with Hall & Oates, earned praise and brought Ruffin back to TV. Daryl Hall believed in him so much that he featured David in special programs and even backed a solo tour. But even when handed opportunity, Ruffin self-sabotaged. He missed tapings, broke promises, and sank deeper into addiction. Ruffin's problem was never lack of talent. The problem was that he trusted no one except himself. In his mind, Motown owed him lasting glory, The Temptations owed him an apology, and the world owed him eternal recognition. But reality was different. Those who had loved him, helped him, admired him, slowly grew tired, turned away, and left David alone with his addictions, his complaints, and the endless dark. On June 1, 1991, David Ruffin was found dead at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia. Cause of death: cocaine overdose. He died at age 50, an age at which he could have still stood on stage singing My Girl One More Time, bringing an audience to tears. But that moment never came. News of his death covered headlines not out of shock, but sorrow. Everyone knew this day was coming. What no one dared say aloud was this: perhaps David Ruffin had been gone for some time, ever since he stopped recognizing himself as anything more than the name that once shook the foundation of American soul music. David's story stands as a cautionary tale for generations of artists to come. Talent is necessary, but never enough. No one has the right to believe they are the sky forever, because every light eventually dims, and if you blindly believe yours is eternal, you may be the first to be swallowed by the dark. The secrets, mysteries left behind before his final breath. When the spotlight dimmed for good on June 1, 1991, David Ruffin took with him not just a legendary voice, but a host of unanswered questions. While the official cause of death was ruled as a cocaine overdose, the circumstances surrounding his final hours, from cryptic last words, strange behavior, to the disappearance of personal items after his death, have long made it difficult to accept the end as straightforward. And perhaps even in rest, David Ruffin is still whispering something through. According to reports, Ruffin was admitted to the emergency room at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital, Philadelphia, late on May 31, 1991, in full cardiac arrest. The person who brought him in did not leave a clear identity. Police identified the body using fingerprints and Motown artist records. The man who once made millions cry with My Girl now died silently, without ID, without friends, without family at his side. A death that stood in stark contrast to the way he had lived. Just weeks before his death, Ruffin reportedly called his brother Quincy to tell him he was working on a memoir, a book that would expose what they did in the dark. In a surviving draft later found by Quincy, David wrote, "I've been silent too long. They think I've forgotten, but I never did. They think I've forgiven, but I can't. Music gave me everything, but they took my soul." Fragmented words, but with the tone of someone about to pull back the curtain on a system that once made him. And then, in a rare interview from 1990, David had hinted darkly, "There are stories I was told never to tell. Maybe I'll tell them someday, maybe I won't. But people need to know the truth." Source: Bet Interview Archives, October 1990, 03:15. Those words now sound eerily prophetic, because just days after Ruffin's death, numerous personal items including the memoir draft journals and cassette demos were reported missing by his family. His West Philly apartment was found ransacked, yet no formal burglary report was ever filed. His relatives called it a calculated cleansing. A close friend, Charles Big Chuck Johnson, told the Detroit Free Press, David believed that one day he'd be taken out, not because of drugs, but because he knew too much. His death didn't shock me. The silence afterward did. Silence that was also Motown's response to his passing. No press release, no official tribute. Smokey Robinson attended the funeral. Aretha Franklin sang at the memorial. But Berry Gordy, founder of Motown, was entirely absent. Ruffin's name was never mentioned at any internal Motown memorials that followed. This only deepened suspicions that David had long-standing conflicts with Motown over royalties and rights. In unpublished writings, Ruffin stated, "I used to think I was part of the family. Then I realized not everyone gets a seat at that table." According to Quincy, David had been working with a lawyer to file a lawsuit demanding a percentage of earnings from Temptations hits he had led vocally. But before the case could be filed, David died. That legal file and even the name of the attorney disappeared from all records. In a 1992 interview, former bandmate Eddie Kendricks said bitterly David was dangerous to some people, not because of what he did, but because of what he remembered. If Ruffin was dangerous, it wasn't due to scandal, but because of the memories he carried. He had seen what lay behind Motown's glamorous facade: vague contracts, racial favoritism in the industry of the 60s and 70s, and big names thought to be untouchable. David Ruffin's death, with all its loneliness, ambiguity, and unanswered questions, wasn't just the closing chapter of A Voice. It was a question mark hanging over an entire power structure where artists can be built into icons and erased without a trace. The legend and the forgotten. You could go to weddings across the world, from backyard parties in the American South to lavish receptions in Paris, and chances are high you'll hear a familiar tune drifting through the speakers. I've Got Sunshine on a Cloudy Day. My Girl, the hit that defined a generation, the benchmark for sweetness in soul music. But if you ask 10 people singing along who gave that lyric its soul, perhaps 8 of them would hesitate. The name David Ruffin, the voice that led the way, the man who poured his burning heart into every note, seems to have faded within the very legend he helped create. After his death, the Temptations continued to perform. They rotated through different lineups, toured endlessly, collected awards, and appeared on nostalgia programs. Yet David Ruffin's name was rarely called as an essential pillar. In later Motown retrospectives, he was occasionally referenced as one of the leads rather than the man who helped shape the group's original sound. In 1989, he was inducted with the Temptations into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a long overdue honor, though even then the narrative didn't quite place him at the center where he belonged. That belated recognition couldn't erase the truth: David Ruffin never received the place he deserved in the collective memory of the music industry, an industry where success is often measured by how well you fit media narratives and backstage politics. Marvin Gaye is remembered as a revolutionary, Stevie Wonder as a blind genius, Michael Jackson as the king of pop, and David Ruffin. He's too often labeled the talented artist who destroyed himself. Not wrong, but not enough. That label quietly encourages the world to forget that his voice was the emotional backbone for an entire generation of the 60s and 70s. In many historical accounts of Motown, Ruffin appears as a supporting character, a temporary replacement for Eddie Kendricks, an undisciplined link in the chain, a member who was fired. Rarely do these accounts acknowledge the obvious that it was David Ruffin's presence, not someone else's, that transformed The Temptations from a harmonized vocal group into a cultural phenomenon. It's no coincidence audiences once packed the Apollo just to hear him hold the final note of "Ain't Too Proud to Beg." In the 2000s, as the R&B wave resurfaced and artists like John Legend, Ne-Yo, and Usher cited Motown as an influence, Ruffin's name was still missing from most respected lists. Maybe because his solo career wasn't as polished as Smokey Robinson's, or maybe his story was too messy to become part of the official narrative. But fans didn't forget. On YouTube, views for Ruffin's live videos continue to grow each year. Beneath grainy black and white clips are comments from young people who never lived through the Motown era. Why have I never heard of him before? David Ruffin is why I believe in real music. Raw, emotional, and sincere, those reactions may be the purest legacy David ever left behind. In recent years, a few documentaries, music podcasts, and niche TikTok channels have started revisiting the so-called forgotten legends Ruffin often mentioned, alongside artists like Donny Hathaway or Billy Preston. A handful of modern musicians like Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars have cited Ruffin's image and vocal styling as inspiration for their retro soul creations. In 2023, artist Leon Bridges released a tribute titled "David's Cry," recorded live in Detroit, looping Ruffin's rare solo hit, "Walk Away from Love," as a way of invoking the forgotten name. The song didn't chart, but fans labeled it a cultural justice resurrection. Because in the end, David Ruffin wasn't just part of a group. He is a question about who the music industry chooses to remember and who it erases. He is proof that talent doesn't guarantee immortality in the public memory, not without institutional support and a clean story to retell. A critic once wrote, "If Ruffin were born in the TikTok era, he'd go viral every day. But he was born in a time when control belonged to the label, not the people." And that truth makes Ruffin's story not just a personal tragedy, but a quiet scar in the cultural history of Black America. As the years pass, his songs still play, his voice still echoes. But the name Ruffin fades further from public consciousness, like the golden light at the end of day, still radiant but no longer looked at directly. Before the final breath, last words and secrets left untold. One day in late May 1991, David Ruffin boarded a bus leaving Detroit after a small club performance, still singing, even though the spotlight had long faded, and his voice now carried the grain of smoke and liquor. He didn't know it would be one of his last nights. But those close to him sensed something different, a weariness, a distant look in his eyes. Perhaps he too felt something was drawing near. Just days later, Ruffin was found collapsed at a hospital in Philadelphia. The police listed the cause of death as a drug overdose. The man who once made the Apollo rise to its feet died wearing a wrinkled coat with no wallet, no ID, and no one by his side. For an artist of David Ruffin's stature, that death wasn't just tragic, it was mysterious. Some say he was abandoned after being paid $40 by someone in the performance group. Others claim someone stole his belongings and dumped him at the hospital entrance. There's even a theory that he knew he was being targeted and recorded a key conversation, but the tape was never found. For years, his brother Jimmy Ruffin publicly called for a renewed investigation into the death. He believed David wasn't simply a casualty of addiction. David had already beaten those things before. "My brother wasn't weak like people thought. Someone wanted him gone," Jimmy said in a 1993 interview. But the case quickly went cold. No full autopsy report, no arrests, no trial. Weeks after the funeral, a middle-aged woman left an envelope beneath the flower stand at David's grave. Inside was a scrap of paper scrawled by hand. "You sang for us, but no one listened when you cried. No one knows who she was." But her words captured the heartbreak of an entire life. David Ruffin spoke volumes, not in words but in music. And it was the silence of the public, the music industry, and the people who once called him brother that allowed him to die without ever telling his full story. In his final years, Ruffin continued writing in an old notebook filled with reflections, unfinished lyrics, and names he never wanted to forget, even if they wanted to forget him. The notebook was found after his death, but only part of it was published in a small biography held under his daughter's copyright. The rest remains unreleased to this day. Some pages spoke of dreams of performing once more with the Temptations. Others were apologies without a clear recipient. But one line stood out, written in shaky handwriting and underlined 3 times. "If they won't let me back in, I'll leave my voice at the door." It might be the most beautiful, heartbreaking, and honest thing ever written about David Ruffin, a man who never truly got the return he longed for. Today, at his grave in Detroit, fans still leave pens, toy microphones, roses, and handwritten notes that read, "We still hear you." And perhaps that is the last consolation left. Though his career was cut short, though his name faded, and though the truth may never be fully revealed, his voice lives on. Someone still listens, someone still cries, and someone like you, like me, is still here reading to the very last line just to hear David Ruffin's story one more time. And if one day you happen to hear My Girl playing in a cafe, remember it's not just a love song. It's the voice of a man who loved music the way a person loves life, even when life was never kind to him. Don't let what he left behind be buried in forgetfulness. Share his story and help return the name David Ruffin to where it has always belonged, at the very top of the Hall of Memory. If this story moved you, leave a comment for David Ruffin, the man who once sang for the whole world but left it in silence. Don't forget to share this video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the untold stories of the legends history tried to forget. Because here we don't just tell stories, we bring memories back to life.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.